Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Yes, I'm Duggan Cooley, the CEO of the Pinellas Community Foundation. I'm joined by David Bender, our Director of Grants and Operations. We've got some of our ARPA team here today too, Jocelyn Howard and Rose Cervantes, and then Alithia Stanfield, who's the chair of our large projects selection committee, is here as well. For you today, we want to go and make sure that we have a good understanding of an overview for you, definitions, information about how we sort of created the process. David's going to take care of that, and then I'm going to help you understand where we've been, where we are right now, and then really what's next for us. So I'm going to turn it over to David in just a second, but I want to thank you for making sure that funds were allocated. You took about 10% of your ARPA allocation and allocated that to nonprofit capital projects, understanding that nonprofits were impacted by the pandemic, and want to thank you for making that investment in those organizations. So I'll turn it to David, and he'll go over his portion.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'd like to start with some definitions just to set context for the rest of what we're going to be speaking about today. First, types of organizations. So we're all talking about nonprofits, but we know they come in lots of shapes and lots of sizes, which is why we have small organizations, which we define as having an under $500,000 annual operating budget, and large organizations, which is over $500,000. There are also two tracks to this program. Capital assets come in a variety of, again, shapes and sizes, and so there are small purchases, which are capital assets with a useful life of at least 5 years and costing less than $200,000 that do not involve modifications to property. And then a large project is an acquisition of or modification to property. An easy shortcut for this, it doesn't always apply to every capital asset, but small purchases are things that move: computers, vehicles, refrigerators, and large projects are those that don't. So building extensions, roof replacements, HVAC systems. There is an overhead allowance allowed for applications to the large projects track. Some of these proposed projects that are being reviewed right now are quite complex, that involve construction. So there is an overhead allowance for project management and administration of the funding. I'd also just like to add a small footnote definition of negative economic impact. That really is the framework for this funding. The organizations applying to this fund have to show some kind of negative economic impact from the pandemic. I'll give some examples in just a bit of what that might look like, but it's a core tenet of this fund. We've really aimed to create a very transparent process. Every application, every report, every contract, and every meeting that takes place with where decisions take place are on our website. People can attend live or watch the recording. If you have an organization that you know and you want to see what they requested, that is on there, as well as the contracts and reports that they submit. All decisions take place through a review committee. We've tried to arrange these with a variety of people based on where they are in Pinellas, their work experience, industry. For example, on that large projects committee where we're dealing with construction, there are people that actively work in the construction industry reviewing these proposals. They spend about a month reviewing applications, scoring according to a rubric, which I'll get into in just a moment, and then they meet on Zoom. Nonprofits are invited to this committee meeting so that committee members can ask questions to clarify and close any gaps that there might be in a proposal so that they're making the best decisions they can. The rubrics are also public. Organizations have access to the rubric while they're applying, so they know exactly on what dimensions their application is going to be evaluated. Some of that criteria is how strong the purchase is. It has to align with their mission and what they do. We're not going to start funding a capital asset for a new program, especially considered that this is pandemic relief funding and a little backwards looking in that regard. Again, that negative economic harm from the pandemic, the organization has to show it. It is not enough for their clients to be impacted. The organization has to show some kind of negative economic impact, though the strongest requests will show both a negative harm to the organization and to the clients being served. Where they are in the county, that can be either using a demonstration of data of need, showing that this area we work on is really high need, or a shortcut is qualified census tracts, QCTs, that's determined by HUD. An applicant can use either of these to show where we're working and where this asset will be used will help the areas most in need in our county. The request has to be proportional to the organization's budget and the negative economic impact suffered by the organization, and they have to be able to cover any increased operating costs. So if you are building a new building, you have to be able to sustain that on your own, and you have to be able to demonstrate how you'll do that. To be eligible for this program, you have to be a 501c3 public charity working in Pinellas, serving Pinellas County residents. Again, that negative economic impact, fundraising revenue loss, reductions in grant revenue, reduced service delivery. Some government entities are C3s, such as our Palm Harbor and Eastlake Libraries, for example. Provided you are a C3, you are eligible, and you are not a fundraising arm for a government entity. This criteria was set back in the July 2022 work session and has kind of remained the same throughout the program. When the county started developing this program prior to PCF's administration of it, they used a Haggerty Consulting to kind of create program recommendations. And one of those recommendations that came from that was technical assistance, that nonprofits were really requesting that whoever handled this funding, whoever administered it, offer technical assistance and walk them through the application process. So we've done that. We've held a variety of technical assistance sessions, both in person and on Zoom, where they could bring their application and get advice on it from program staff. And we've also offered that for those currently in the contracting phase. Those were awarded in round one. They are getting assistance regarding how to request payment, how to compile invoices, and how to ensure they're complying with this funding. So now I'll kick it over to Duggan to talk about kind of what this funding has looked like so far.
Thank you, David. So for round one, as was mentioned, there were two tracks, small purchases and large projects. In the small purchases round, we had a total of 80 applicants come forward. Those 80 applicants requested $6.5 million. 34 organizations of that 80 were awarded funding at $2.25 million. This process for the small purchases round one those recommendations have already been approved by the commission. That was back in November. Those are under contract now, and those purchases are starting, and payments are going to be made shortly to organizations. So that's already under contract and moving ahead. I want to make sure that you understand when we talk about impact, based on the information that was provided from applicants about how they do their work in the community, we believe that with those 34 that were awarded, over 500,000 people will be impacted by the purchases once that is complete. So broad impact throughout the community. Just a look for you, and in your packet is small purchases by category. So you can see how this funding is going throughout nonprofits in the community of different types, and their focus areas as well. So that's broad throughout the nonprofit sector too. The largest pieces of that being benefit from small purchases to organizations addressing the needs of youth and families and food. And included as additional supplements with the information that we provided, you can see a listing of categories, how organizations were categorized into this pie. So that's in the supplemental materials provided to you as well. A few success stories just for you to know about and to highlight for you. One organization that received funding through this and has been awarded funding as Reach St. Pete. Some of you may know them because of the decommissioned PSTA bus that was provided to them. Their goal is to try and make sure that food assistance to address food insecurity is more accessible throughout the community and going into communities and neighborhoods. They are receiving funding toward a refrigerated truck to increase their capacity to distribute food. And they have seen a dramatic increase in the need in the community, and so that purchase for them is going to help them raise their capacity to serve the community. Gulf Coast Dental Outreach provides dental care to low-income adults. They are located in Tarpon Springs. Many of the folks that come to them are senior citizens. We know that of residents in our community living below the federal poverty level, only about 5% have regular access to dental care. They are using the funds that they were awarded to buy X-ray equipment to help them meet their increased demand. Dental is a huge need in our community. Another example of funds that were awarded go to BOLI centers. Many of you know them for the housing work that they do with people who have a variety of life challenges. They maintain group homes and independent living. They are receiving funding for new maintenance vehicles. Their goal is to turn over units faster when someone is leaving one of their units so that more people can get into their housing at a quicker rate. Beyond these, there are 31 more stories that you will have access to. These are things that we should all be proud of, and you certainly should be proud of for helping to make possible in the community. We will share those with you as those come alive. And beyond those other stories, there will be more after round 2 and after the large projects process as well. So we talked about small purchases. Let's talk for a moment round 1, large projects. And so as David had mentioned before, these are modifications, improvements to real property, acquisition to real property. At the beginning of the process, we began with a letter of intent. We knew there would be a lot of applications, so instead of making all organizations go through quite dramatic and lengthy application process, for 78 of them, we began with a letter of intent to give us key information to understand, would this project be viable? Does it fit with the eligibility criteria? Does it make sense to move on to a full application? Those initial letters of intent were more than $80 million in requests. There were 23 organizations that the committee moved on through to allow them to complete a full application, of those 23 that were moved forward, 19 of them actually submitted applications. We had some that dropped out. One of them has enough funding to complete their project without these funds, which is wonderful. Others, as they got into the nitty-gritty of what was required and what they were going to need to do, either scope of project changed or they had other funding sources that challenged them to be able to get all the documentation in time for this particular process. In this round, there's an available budget of $10 million. And of those organizations that have completed their full application, it is $22.5 million in requests against that $10 million. So these full applications right now are in review by the review committee, and that committee is going to meet publicly on March 7th. They will meet, and grantees will be, or applicants will be invited to attend that meeting, answer questions. That will be done publicly, and we will have the recording of that available. And then after that meeting is complete and there are recommendations, they will be coming to you at the next available commission meeting after that meeting, where we can get that on the agenda. Just so you see what happened with the applications that were submitted. I know that in the presentation, the health percent, it didn't quite make it. That's 10% on health. This is the picture of what type of applications were submitted, and I would suggest not looking so much at the dollar figures as much as the percents. So if you add it all up, it looks like it is more than $22.5 million. Some of these organizations, the average is a weighted average, so they might have been included in 2 categories, and so you can see that on the supplemental sheets that we gave you. What matters most in this presentation of data is the percent. And so you can see that it made right now for a wide variety of organizations addressing critical needs in the community. So that is sort of round 1 and what's in process. And so really the meat of helping you with us today is what we want to do for round 2. So in our original plans for this funding, we have been clear all along that funding would be held back from the total funding available. That was presented as part of the timeline back in July of 2022, a holdback. And the idea of that is that we would bring information to you spring of 2023, so we're early, which is great. Or it's Florida spring, I guess, so we're right on time, however you want to look at that. But the goal was that we would learn things from the initial funding process, and the community would have feedback, you would have feedback about how the process has gone, and so that there would be dollars available to be used based on the lessons learned from round 1. And so based on your feedback, based on feedback from the community, we are coming to you with a recommendation of how to use these funds for round 2. The goals of the funding for round 2 are to provide an opportunity for organizations that didn't receive funding in round 1 to resubmit in both tracks. Want to be clear that if you were awarded funding, you cannot apply in the same track second time around, trying to make sure that that is accessible to as many organizations as possible, so you can't successfully double dip in the same track. And that we wanted to modify the process to incorporate your feedback, making sure that funding has an opportunity to reach more organizations. So we're using the same tracks, small purchases and large projects. Under the small purchases, there's a maximum dollar amount request of $100,000 or $150,000, and we'll look at the chart in just a minute, depending on budget size of organization. And in the large projects, there's a maximum request of $500,000. The proposed timeline for this is that the small purchases application would launch on March 1st, and the final recommendations would be back to you on your agenda for review and approval May, June of this year, around that time frame. And that the large projects would launch April 3rd, and that you would have those in your hands by August. And the timing of these, small purchases can go shortly. Want to make sure on the large project side that the determinations are finalized from round one, giving organizations an opportunity to resubmit if they'd like to, when they find final decisions have been made around the large projects. So nice chart summary for you. I want to be clear in this that you see this, and this is available to the public, but the process will be seamless for organizations. They don't have to pick, where do I fit? They just need to decide, is it a small purchase or is it large project? From there, on the back end of all this, is the determination made, are they a small organization by budget size, or is the project in the large projects by their request amount? Which track is it going into? So it'll be seamless and easy for organizations. It's meant to be user-friendly. So in the small purchases side, we have tracks dedicated to small organizations, those under $500,000, and then the large organizations over $500,000. The budget request, the maximum request size for the small organizations would be $100,000, medium-large organizations at $150,000, and we have associated pools of funding available for both of those. Want to also make sure that you understand from the beginning of this, we had divided the small organization, small purchases pool in half. So we have said regularly that there would be a second round anyway for small organizations, that very top line. And we divided that process in half, just so you know, because we have found with small organizations, it takes a while for communications to make it out there sometimes, and they don't always get it the first time around or the second time around. So that's one of the benefits of wanting to split that for those small organizations to begin with. And then on the large project side, it'll be divided by the request size. And so if the request is up to $200,000, that's going in one track. And then if it's over $200,000 but under $500,000, it'll go in a different track. And this division is based on the types of organizations that applied, their budget sizes, what made it through, what didn't make it through, the size of the request from organizations, what seemed to be more successful in round one. That we have used all that data to fuel sort of this recommendation here, request size, and then how these are tracked out, and then their associated budgets. And then there is, with this, also some dollars available to help organizations with their compliance. There's some dollars there for that as well. Just to review for you some of the changes again with this process, we are not doing a letter of intent again for large projects. The scope of these projects is smaller. And so the organizations will be able to apply and get it all done for large projects. That's modifications, changes to real property. It'll be in one fell swoop this time, and we feel good about that because the request is the maximum request is lower. We will allow organizations that if they met the eligibility criteria to begin with, and they weren't successful in being funded, they can roll their application from round one over into round two. If the request size is not appropriate for round two, we'll help them change the request size, or they can modify the scope of their proposal. That's up to them. But we will do everything we can to make this as easy as possible on organizations. They don't have to start all over again if they don't want to, and they can edit what they put in during round one, trying to make that as easy as possible. We are strongly recommending that organizations attend technical assistance workshops. We do know that in round one, participation in technical assistance increased the likelihood that you were successful in getting funding in round one. It is a great opportunity to ask questions, clarify what's being asked in the application, get clarification of the rubric, and so we are strongly recommending that organizations participate in that for round 2. We're not mandating that, but strongly recommending it. And also, we'll have a grant writing workshop with our team, and then strongly recommending that organizations attend that as well. And I already covered the last one, that large projects are grouped and evaluated by their request size, so that similar complexities of projects are reviewed together.
Again, I have a question from Commissioner
Yes,
Lampellin.
please.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.